We all have relationships where we know someone who is living with rough edges. They can be high-maintenance people. They can be brutal, and at times they can be hurtful. And this affects our attitude towards them, and we tend to be, in such a situation, judgmental. Well, Jesus gave a stern warning about condemning others. In fact, one of his most well-known sayings, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged," is also one of his most misunderstood sayings. Some people think that it means that we shouldn't speak out against a wrong or make a stand for a Christ-honoring value. Well, that's not what Jesus is saying at all. What he is saying is that when it comes to looking at the lives of others, proceed with caution. The question is, can you do it without being a busybody? Can you do it without being holier than thou? Yes, you can. For you see, there is a difference between intervening and interfering. It's all in how you look at others and how you look at yourself. When it comes to dealing with other people's faults, Jesus teaches some very clear principles here that we need to keep in mind when this issue of judging others is on the table. Now, that first principle is, if you're not on the jury, don't try to reach a verdict. You might say, "Lonnie, what do you mean by that?" Well, it's very simple. If it's not your judgment to make, don't make the judgment. Now, there are a few areas in our lives where we do need to make certain judgments, to make the right decision, to come to the right conclusions, like whether or not we'll hire someone, or whether or not we will marry someone, or whether or not we will allow our children to go to that party or that social event, or what apps we will allow them to have on their telephones, or whether or not we will allow someone to borrow the car, or whether we'll give money to a certain charity. There are, so to speak, certain juries that we sit on, and it is our responsibility in those situations to make a right judgment. But however, in Matthew 7, Jesus is talking about a very different kind of judging. He's talking about making a judgment against someone when you are not on that jury. In other words, making a judgment against someone when it's none of your business. From time to time, I'll hear someone say, "Oh, I don't think so-and-so is an authentic Christian." Well, that may be their opinion. But is it really fully their call to make whether or not someone is a Christian? I don't really believe they are on that kind of jury. When I hear someone say that, my response is, well, be sure to let God know so that God won't accidentally let them into heaven. When Jesus said, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged," he was talking about making judgments that are none of our business. The problem is that when we make these judgments, we often make them without knowing all the facts. There may be some people who are far from God, and they're close to you, and you're concerned about them, and they have reached a point to where they are not all that overly concerned about walking with Christ, and we worry about them, but we don't know all the details in their life of what has transpired that has led them to that position. But God does. Before you pass judgment on anyone, remind yourself that you may not have all the facts. And there just might be a part of the story that you don't know. And most likely, it's not your business to know. If you don't sit on that jury, don't try to reach a verdict. let God be the judge. Live in that freedom. There's other scriptures that talk about that. We go to the book of James. James said this. James says, brothers, do not slander one another. Anyone who speaks against his brother or judges him speaks against the law and judges it. Who are you to judge your neighbor? James said. We also find the Apostle Paul chimed into this subject as well. The Apostle Paul said this. He said, you then, why do you judge your brother? Or why do you look down on your brother? For we will all stand before God's judgment seat. So when it comes to dealing with other people's faults, there's something we can do in order to avoid this self-righteous hypocrisy. The first is to take a look at your own faults before you look at anyone else's. Jesus himself said it very clearly in this reading. Jesus said, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? The problem is, too often we have a tendency to consider someone's speck a plank and consider our plank as merely a speck. Jesus warns that before you judge others or condemn others or criticize others, look at yourself. Fix your own life before you try to fix everyone else. Look at yourself closely and ask, am I in a position to offer criticism? When you ask yourself that question with a sincere heart, 9 times out of 10, you'll discover that you have a plank in your eye to deal with first. And there's another thing that Jesus tells us to do here. Jesus says, avoid self-righteous hypocrisy. It is to limit your advice to do as I do. Jesus said it this way. He said, you hypocrites, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. It's not that Jesus wants us to abandon the idea of helping someone become a better person. It's that he wants us to do it with integrity. And the person whose attitude is, well, do as I say and not as I do, has no credibility with the person he's trying to help. I realized that long ago, that if I would keep my office cluttered and messy, that I would lose credibility with my kids when I tell the kids, hey, you need to clean your room. I realized that if I don't control my tongue, I'm not in a position to demand that they control their tongue. I realize that if I'm not on time, I can't scold them when they're not on time. If you want to give anyone any kind of advice in order to avoid this self-righteous hypocrisy, well, make sure that the underlying theme to your message is, do as I do. So, before you point out someone's faults, make sure you're intervening, not interfering. And ask yourself, am I on this jury? Is this any of my business? Ask yourself, have I examined my life? Am I in a position to offer an advice and correct? Am I telling this person to do as I do, not just as I say? If you're ready, then you have the opportunity to help someone improve their life. And hear what you have to say. It's the difference between intervening and interfering. But our first concern, according to Jesus, is when you look beyond yourself, proceed with caution. Amen.